hello there. I am the Conspicuous Moo, and this is the Moo Review, which is a new section where we dedicate some of my very long forgotten movie analysis talents to try and work out what's good and what's bad out there in the world of cinema. And today we're going to start with Bombshell, which has a very interesting premise and quite a cast, so we'll see how we roll with it. Bombshell is a 2019 film directed by Jay Roach, who is responsible for some of my more favourites, like Borat, Austin Powers and Meet the Parents. It tells the story of Gretchen Carlson, played by Nicole Kidman, who sues the CEO of Fox News, Roger Ailes, played suitably creepily by John Lithgow, for sexual harassment after first being marginalised for rejecting his sexual advances and eventually being fired. It also tells the story of two other women affected by Ailes' depravity, ambitious new recruit Kayla Pospisil, played by Margot Robbie, and prominent news anchor Megyn Kelly, who is played by Charlize Theron. Now, before we get into the guts of this film and throw it all over the place, let's set some time aside for the positive things about this film. Now, I personally don't know anything about what Megyn Kelly is really like, but I did find Charlize Theron's performance quite exceptional. Margot Robbie less so, although she does do an excellent job in the most important scene of the movie with John Lithgow. And speaking of him, once again, I don't really know Roger Ailes or that whole background all that well, so I had a fresh slate to look at this character, and it is a satisfyingly unsettling performance. There are character aspects of Roger Ailes that I think are touched upon but left unexplored. Something about the paranoia, more of the paranoia stuff would have been fun. But I put that more down to the writing than the actor himself. Now, they made quite a bold creative decision having three main characters in this film, but they've done it very well because they're all in different tiers of Fox News. So you have, the newcomer, the person who's been demoted and is kind of in the middle tier, and then you have the one who's at the pinnacle. And featuring three women at those different tiers, all being affected by the actions of one man, is a very good way of portraying, the pervasive nature of this harassment in the Fox newsroom. The film is also shot in a very close-up and personal, slightly jagged way that gives it a documentary and realistic feel, which is quite effective, and they have managed to weave the archive footage in rather well. But the most important credit I can give to Bombshell is that it doesn't get overtly political in tone. There is no feasible way to separate Fox News and the sitting President of the United States from the story, but they've managed to sidestep the obvious trap of seeing this as an opportunity to pump out some unwanted political commentary and thinking. This was my main concern before watching this, so very well done for avoiding that and potentially ruining the film with an agenda that's unrelated to the actual story. So now we've got the positives out of the way, let's move on to the not quite so positives. I did say earlier that some of the casting choices were excellent, but some of them really weren't. The two mismatches that stand out in this film are Malcolm McDowell's Rupert Murdoch impression, which is a front-running candidate for worst Australian accent in a film ever, and Richard Kinder's Rudy Giuliani. It kind of strongly reminded me of the Lips Manless character from the Dick Tracy movie in 1990, and I couldn't get that image out of my head after that. Nicole Kidman's performance was competent, but she is the weakest link of the three main characters, and this is a shame, given that it's her character that starts the whole story rolling. In fact, Nicole gets the least screen time of the three main characters, which is illogical, basically, given that she is the main protagonist. Much more emphasis is put upon Megyn Kelly, who doesn't actually join the rebellion until close towards the end, and so it's quite an acute and obvious imbalance in the three main characters, and that's one of the dangers of having that many main people. If you get the emphasis wrong, it really does show. Talking of characters, a supporting cast is important. The supporting ensemble in this film is enormous. It's so big, in fact, that there simply isn't enough screen time to give any of these people a discernible personality. They are entirely disposable characters, and the film goes so far as to actually start putting labels on people. It's like, this is this guy over here. That is really jarring when you're trying to watch a film and all of a sudden you're like, well, I just wanted to let you know that this is, what's-her-face. Because at the end of the day, most of these names are meaningless to people who don't know the entire, staff at Fox News at that time. So They mean nothing to the initiated, and all of these people have absolutely no impact on the story whatsoever. They simply get labelled, taking us out of, the mystical spell of movie making for a moment, and then they just disappear. So their presence in this film is almost completely pointless. A couple of the more prominent supporting cast members don't need to be there at all either. One is an exposition bot who is given a backstory that had potential but ultimately goes nowhere, and they end up as a cowardly and weak figure. And yes, I'm pointing at you, lesbian secret Democrat character. The other is a clone of Megyn Kelly's husband, who would have been a far more effective foil for her, I would have thought. And, overall, all three main characters could have done with a little more family time put in. Especially Megyn, I respect this person, but I don't particularly like them. And, more family time might have softened those corporate edges a bit. Her only real argument and conflict in the movie is actually with her husband. So that was probably worth exploring more. But now we're going to move on to the real problem with Bombshell. The pacing. This is an extraordinarily flabby script. It's like they just forgot to edit it or something. The film runs for 110 minutes, but we don't actually progress to the lawsuit and accusation part until approximately halfway through. The opening scene is difficult to describe adequately. It's a Megyn Kelly exposition-heavy tour through the facility. Like, a virtual reality tour or something that you would get once you start work at a corporation. And most of it is completely meaningless. What does it matter what floor people are on? What does it matter about these people who work in the pods? Do they have any impact on the story? No, they don't. This is your team. We don't see them again. So, this entire run-through is completely pointless. And, you should respect your audience enough to assume that they're going to be able to work that out themselves, presuming that you've written it well enough. It really does read like, the screenwriting notes to set the scene accidentally got put into the movie, and then they sort of didn't realise till it was too late and cut. And so they just left it in. It's really bizarre, Show Don't Tell is like page 1 of the writing manual, and it was just been completely ignored. Now, of course, all of these main characters have backstories, and, that's important. You need to weave that in so we get a feeling for what these characters are, but a lot of the effort that's been put into the backgrounds here is just simply not necessary. It's very ponderous. There's a lot of additional scenes here that don't need to be shot, and they don't need to be explained either. Their relation to the developing story is sometimes a little questionable as well. I mean, for example, Megyn Kelly and Donald Trump facing off against each other in a debate, which was a rather infamous time, was put in quite some detail here. And a simple throwaway line or a brief scene with Roger Ailes explaining, how Fox reacted to that and what their priorities are would have been much quicker and would have shortened the film and made it a better one. It's not limited to Megyn. Gretchen Carlson's demotional history, put it like that, which had shades of Long Shot, which is another Charlize Theron one, when she's throwing stuff at the two guys, the woman anchor just storms off. It was kind of like that. That also goes on for too long. It goes into the story of how she gets moved to the middle tier. There's low ratings and nothing much is happening, and you don't need that to bring the story forward, and it doesn't really add a lot to her character. The brief and rocketing career of Kayla Pospisil, which is the worst name in the entire world, could well have been taken out altogether, because ultimately it's about the confrontation she has with Roger Ailes in his secure room while he's being creepy. That's the key scene. And it's even less forgivable when you consider that this Kayla Pospisil is not an actual person in history. This is an entirely fictional creation, so it's not as if they had to jam that backstory in from history at all. It's just they put it in there. So unfortunately, all of this additional padding just slows the movie down considerably, and the story is a little pedestrian as a result. I mean, I'm not expecting Die Hard with a bombshell, grenade launchers and doors being blown off and glass going everywhere, but you do need to change the pace of your movie occasionally to keep your audience awake. And having it bogged down all the time also robs it of any real creation of tension or feeling of risk. And unfortunately, that is a general feeling throughout this film. It is extraordinarily safe. It's not taking any chances at all. By the time you get to the lawsuit and then the accusations and counter-accusations, this thing only has 40 minutes left on the clock. Now personally, I would have preferred the script to dig a little more deeply into, the factions that developed inside Fox News on either side. Team Roger over here, people looking out for their careers over here, we've got people who aren't sure whether they should come forward or not, there are people who know women who have been sexually harassed and are trying to encourage them to come forward. There's a whole lot of different things that could have been played out there, and it is touched upon lightly, but bar a vending machine confrontation, is pretty all light and fluffy, and that was an area that could have been explored more. And there are other accusations at this stage in the film which are basically just left unresolved. They're just loose ends. They're never tied up. The one that strikes me the most, which could have been quite interesting, is the undercover detectives inside Fox News watching out for Roger. But that's not really followed up at all. Basically, this film was crying out for a ruthless couple of editors. One, just cutting up the film and making it a lot shorter than it actually is, and the other one with the scriptwriter sitting him down and saying, you really do need to focus more on actual events. Now, I don't know if this is a particular oddity or not, but I did notice that this film had 16 producers, 6 of which were executive. Now, I'm no expert, but that does seem like a lot of people who are all going to want to put their own special stamp on it. So I suspect that contributes to the general feeling about this film that it was an entirely risk-averse storytelling by committee endeavour. At the end of the day, Bombshell isn't a dreadful movie by any means. It just lacks energy and precision. It's a personal shame to me to see a missed opportunity to really grab the sexual harassment story by the horns and uncover some uncomfortable truths about, corporate behaviour in general, given that the high-profile nature of the story that it's based upon. It's competent fare, but it is unremarkable, and probably deserved to be a much better film than it turned out to be. Overall, 6 moves. And so, Bombshell. Missed opportunity, basically. I will be back with further things later on inside of the future bits, but until then I am the conspicuous moo, and I bid you adieu.